Thank you very much for the opportunity for inviting me to talk about some outlines, cooperation between and on which topics, between which institutions, between which bodies. It's especially difficult in a time span when we are only briefly together for about 6 months, that I'm here in Lodz and in Łódź, and to find a way as well to link with different institutions to which I am linked, to which you have links, and to build a network. During one campaign in the United States, there was this slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." And of course, I agree to a large extent. We are dealing with economic questions, and in particular nowadays, we are facing this problem of the educational sector being under huge pressures in economic terms, not only in terms of scarcity of money, but in terms of adapting to a new structure, to a new thinking. But at least to some extent, to a large extent, at least if I shall talk, it is about history. It is about from where we all come, and now in particular talking about me, or me being talking here about from where I come. First, I'll start with a personal note, although I'm not sure if it is really correct to say it is a personal note, or if it is much wider, this historical setting against which I'm standing as a background. At some stage, young as I was, innocent perhaps, I wanted to study music. And it was a little bit the time as well, I wanted to study psychology. Psychology, to be more precise, it was a little bit about anti-music, if you want, and definitely about anti-psychology, anti-psychiatrics. It had been, of course, about some individual issues, some preferences, subjective preferences, but it had been as well very much about striving for a different order, if you want. My first encounter with the political dimension of music had been a TV series about Black Sabbath, if I remember it correctly. And it was not the group, it was about the history of rock music, and the other was, strangely enough, A Summer Night's Dream, Shakespeare, on a festival organized by the trade unions. And then there had been many, if you want to use such a term, accessories. Political science, I studied philosophy, economics, sociology, of course, not least. And I still continued to think at least about psychiatry, anti-psychiatry, and, if you want, a kind of anti-law, which does not mean anti-legal, but anti-law. Let me briefly turn to psychology, not least because I was listening the last days to some old lectures by Erich Fromm. Psychology was, of course, something of an excuse of young people looking for their own identity, looking for a place in society, but as well looking for their identity. Who am I really? What am I? What is my position in life? Not so much in society. Of course, it was developing to exactly this then, the idea of what is it, this idea of where am I standing in society? How do I develop into this society? It had been the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, if you want, the anti-authoritarian movement, the questioning of society, of mainstream post-Second World War society. And it had been not least this acknowledgement, indirectly or later directly, that man makes his or her own, man makes his, women make their, her own history. Men, women, plural groups, all this shaping identities, of course, but it is not about identities as such in a psychological sense. This was getting increasingly clear to me, but it was this clarity, this process of clarifying for me in the active process of being within the society as a matter of looking at the same time at the society. At a society which emerged for us, not least, and I say consciously for us, not least as a kind of tyranny, at that time, mind, as a tyranny of the market, but as well our own tyranny, if you want, of the political movement. It was a time of not civil war, but it was a kind of tyranny of the market standing against our tyranny of despair. It still had been marked by the Vietnam War. It had been still marked by the experience of, for us, an unreflected relationship to fascism. And it had been surely on both sides tyranny as well in terms of some form of violence. Now, having said this, we surely had been a generation that can be seen as privileged. The privileged ones, privileged in multiplied forms, coming usually from more or less liberal homes. Liberal possibly meaning just leaving us doing whatever we wanted, knowing from the other side that otherwise the influence would be even getting more limited. It had been usually as well a kind of affluence, this background, not really wealth, but at least this security. And it had been, in one way or another, Christian, Catholic, or Protestant, for me Protestant, and linked to the work ethics, and linked surely as well with the obligation of the not outspoken but implicitly carried on ethics of work, the Protestant ethics. And at the same time, we had been dreamers, trying to escape in different ways, in political ways, to utopias. Just Ernst Bloch, to mention one, or this Frankfurt School, there had been some part of it concerned with this utopia, the positive utopia. Dreamers as well in terms of the hippie movement, folk music, and the like. Nevertheless, being realists as well, that at least many of us could travel, not in the way as it is common now, some into privileged frameworks for the education, some into political contexts where there had been two states in Germany, and where it had been possible as well, not just to change borders as some did, but as well to travel between the two states. Now the question seen from today is, of course, did we fail? Did we fail, or did we manage to proceed to something that could be said is the realization of part, at least, of these utopias? I don't know, I'm not sure, and there are surely different answers, not only different answers in terms of whom you're talking to, but as well in terms of what you perceive as the real background of these utopias. The personal situation, I think the difficulty for all of us had been about actually this tension that had been inherent in, I think it was Rudi Dutschke or one of these comrades who said, who had been talking about the long march through the institutions. It had been always this tension, these inherent tensions of looking where are we in terms of the real society, and can we do anything to change it without leaving it, without completely denying this kind of reality. Now, this reality, and as well, of course, part of this success or failure question is what I'm doing now in terms of being here in Łódź, being in Poland, teaching European integration, asking if it's a failed project, and putting development and growth as a tensional field against each other. That's two causes. Research is about this fashionable topic of digitization, although I'm not really interested in the mainstream debate on security, precarity. This is, of course, something that is of interest for me as well, but I'm more interested in the fundamental changes of the structure, the movements, the change of capital structures and structures that are actually challenging society as it stands now. It is difficult to connect this with my previous experience, difficult and at the same time challenging, because of course teaching research, this is always linked in one way or another to questions of personalities. And of course I carry this on, if you want, this experience of lectures that I have had as lectures, of colleagues later that I knew already as a student, or that I learned later without ever having studied as a student. But I feel myself very much as an eternal student, continuing being really on this learning side. Now, I could, of course, mention the great names, the giants on which shoulders we stand, or I stand. I had been lucky really in this respect, but don't want to name the important people who played a role there. Some surely a positive role, and others counterparts, some people with strong personalities I wouldn't say against whom I had to work, but against whom I wanted to identify myself with my own approach. Nevertheless, taking over some parts of this. So, looking at these topics and looking at what may be called in sociology the Bielefeld School, although I'm not sure there, there had been, I would say, 4 cornerstones that are decisive for my thinking. The one is about control. And control is, of course, a matter of property, but it is as well something that would be called today capability. And control in either way is a matter of processuality. It is not control here and now and in this one point, but it is about power, it is about a relationship that always is changing. You'll never find it as a matter that is once for all defined. This linking to economics had been for me always a matter of looking at, of course, the topics that we had to look at studying economics, the production of goods and exchange of goods, but it had been as well about a much wider field. You may understand it with a reference to political economy, but it is not this. It is really a wide field of producing personalities, ourselves in these exchange processes, but as well others, about dependencies and support systems and, but as well about with these social relationships, of course. And this is linking to processuality on the one hand, linking on the other hand to relationality. Law is a decisive moment, not only in terms of legality, but as well in terms of legitimacy. This permanent tension, if you want, between something being lawful but lacking rightfulness. Is arts as a 4th pillar then a kind of resilience mechanism that allows us to deal with this permanent tension, to deal with these conflicts that are in it? This may seem to be very abstract, especially when it comes to thinking about cooperation in concrete terms. What can one do together? But at the same time, I think it is decisive in terms of thinking about where do we stand in terms of from which platform do we actually start. Since I'm actually working on this topic of digitization, always being confronted with the questions of, yes, we have to re-establish, or we have to overcome this insecurity, and the answer on how can we do it, we have to re-establish the old system. We have to look back. Is it possible to go back to the old securities? I'm always surprised, and there you see how important it is to really recognize from where we come. I'm always surprised to hear this, especially from older colleagues, because we have been criticizing, vehemently criticizing these old securities. They did not exist really. Part of the population had been benefiting from it, a huge part not. There had been always this problem of, yes, we are doing good in country A, but it is on the cost of another country. These are some issues where it shows that we have to be careful about what we are talking. Going back or trying to move forward. Now, moving forward is, of course, not really easy. I would say, coming to philosophy, that the old philosophy is actually looking at something that you can say is the being, interpreting our being, interpreting our existence. Mind, this had been a key word as well in the philosophy of my youth, if you want, Sartre, Beauvoir, Simone de Beauvoir, existentialist philosophy. This is the old philosophy, even if that kind of existentialism was very progressive, was very innovative and revolutionary. But it had been a kind of looking at how things are, trying to understand them. Tradition from Max Weber, interpretative sociology. Now, the new philosophy is, or at least it should be, completely different. It should be not about understanding ourselves, but it should be about understanding our relationships. Not as relationships between individuals, amongst individuals, but as a relationship in terms of relationality, in terms of complex systems. There you see one of my teachers, if you want, shining through, in terms of complex systems of interaction, of communication. If it happens or not, it doesn't really matter. It should happen, and at least we have to think about it as well in terms of why is it not possible that it happened. Kant had been thinking about it in one way, that he said people are stuck in their relations and they have to think about it exactly in terms of the imperative, think about the other. And otherwise, you are neglecting what may be termed, what may be seen as the essence of human being. But at the same time, he had not been fully acknowledging that actually this relationality had been a processuality. This imperative had been defined once forever in very general terms, but it had not been seen really as fundamentally, emphasis, fundamentally a matter of process, permanently renegotiated, and as such depending on power. Power is something that in the old philosophy, of course this is over the point, but it did not really exist. So we are talking about science, we are talking about academia and the individual, because it is something where we are part of a system of agencies, of agents, of actors, even if at times exactly this system doesn't allow us to fully unfold ourselves in this way. What does it mean in terms of cooperation, in terms of future academic work? I think to some extent there is this confrontation with the idea of academia is expensive, expending, aiming on expanding, and this makes it so expensive as well. this is the idea of accumulating knowledge. And there I'm wondering if it is really about accumulating knowledge or if it is more about accumulating power over the others, not developing relationality, but the idea of developing power, our own personal power, national power, whatsoever. You have many examples in history where this was the case. In the extreme case, the abuse of science, of academic work. And the other thing is, in today's society, in today's academic work, it is very much about, if you want, a wiki society. Everything has to go fast, 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 fast. Insofar, we are stepping back in an anti-enlightenment era, where we have this problem, and I would say it is a problem really, that we lost the ability to discursive development, to development. We are setting dots here and there without being ready to accept totality of knowledge. A huge challenge, and a challenge where you see today actually that many academic institutions are again going this way, are looking for this, are looking for a marketplace of knowledge, not in terms of saleable knowledge, of consumables, or of knowledge that can be immediately applied, but of knowledge that is developing by cooperation. Open source software is just one thing. What is going on the publication market is, on the one hand, extremely sad and frightening. At the same time, we have a step back from this already now. One of the problems is, for me at least, that we are stepping with enlightenment into an era that is, on the one hand, characterized by this humanist approach of a wide range where we want to have an enhanced understanding of what we are doing, of knowledge development. But at the same time, exactly this system, for many times this had been discussed and brought forward, the eclipse of reason, the halvening, the division of modernity, this strictly rational, in a limited and limiting way, rational way of thinking. And of course, if you go back and look at the ideological part of it, the reification of this ideology is exactly methodological individualism, methodological nationalism, and with this, as reification, the issue of contract. The contract is the ultimate expression of this way of thinking, limiting any relationality on relations between two parties and making it calculable. Instrumental reason had been another expression that had been used in this context. Isn't that great? Isn't that exactly what we, when we had been young, what we wanted? Arguing always at the time, arguing against clientelism, arguing against these closed systems which we had been facing. Now, the ultimate idea of rational instrumental reason, this was exactly, in a way, you can say, what we had been asking for. And something that Max Weber already talked about many years ago, sine ira et studio. This was exactly as well the iron cage. And it had been, of course, the iron cage of bureaucracy, but it had been as well the iron cage, and this had been our argument at the time as well, of interests, of power, and of the simple thing, yes, it is the economy. There it is where we have power and where we have interest, be it in personal relationships, be it then overarching in terms of power relationship between classes, and then, of course, between states. We see this again today, talking about European integration and the failed project, especially when we look at Greece, at Brexit, and similar questions. Catalonia, there are so many places we are actually not really thinking about. We just acknowledge them without seeing the sincerity of the problems. And of course, there is a good reason for mentioning it these days. There is the issue of Turkey. Seems to be far away. There is this issue of migration. It seems to be as well far away. And then I'm asking, teaching here, how far away is it really? On the one hand, you have this extreme migration that is in the press. At the same time, we kind of celebrate the students coming from different countries and joining together. How is that possible to be compatible with each other in a system? And then we come to this question of power in a system that is shaped by power or that denies power. Methodologically, we are striving or we are applying still individualism, methodological individualism, methodological nationalism. I'm not talking about other forms of nationalism that are, of course, playing a very important role. We are talking about this presentism, this pragmatism. We have to find solutions for the tiny problems we have, and we are talking about a methodological presentism. After us, the deluge. We don't have to think really about the future. Even if we do it, even if we think about sustainability, we still think about it in the old terms, in terms of solutionism, of pragmatism. We are fearful when it comes to the wider, to the application of wider problems. The problem is that if we want to overcome it, we have to do this double step. We are caught in the old system of thinking. We need another one, and to develop this new one, we actually should have it already. Of course, this is impossible. And of course, this is the urgent thing for academia. Hannah Arendt talked about tyranny, and I'm coming back to tyranny again now at the end. Hannah Arendt talked about tyranny in terms of tyranny is about the loss of public space. And this is exactly what happens today. It would be a huge framing of this. Go to Polanyi, the market society, the dominance of gain orientation, middle of the 19th century being prevalent. This is tyranny in terms of losing public spaces. And at the same time, I see germs of developments, not least here in Łódź, that are moving towards, I don't know what, some strange utilization of old structures, industrial complexes, of course for business, but at the same time for marketplaces. I think that we have to say, to some extent, we lost marketplaces. We lost these spaces, simply spaces for public communication, for publicity. At the same time, I think there's something else. We lost the ability to engage in discourses, to engage in these or utilize these public spaces as they exist, and to find new ways, to search for new ways, and to look, to ask actually those questions that we cannot ask. I want to conclude with a poem by Gunther Kunert. It is, even if you look at the first glance, you may have a different impression. I think it is a nice dedication, if you want, to Poland. Reading Nicolaus Copernicus, that Polish rug robbed me of my trust in a universe divine. And here I stand, with all my law, poor fool, just poorer than before. Thank you.